Well, good morning. Good to see everybody. So I get a chance to talk about P3, public-private partnerships. Just get a sense of your involvement or your understanding of public-private partnerships. If you know a lot about them, raise your hand really high. If you know a little about them, about here, not too much. Okay, good. Thanks. A couple hands that should have gone up. Looks like there's a remedial class afterwards for the PennDOT people now. So just want to share a little bit about what's going on with regards to public-private partnerships, sort of the benefits of them, the concerns, and the future of them in Pennsylvania. Pretty much what I want to say or share, anybody who needs anything done, you can always find somebody to help you. And it's sort of like that analogy with your house once again. If you need help with something, you can find somebody to help you with it. That's a public-private partnership. When you need something done and you need somebody other than yourself to do it. One of the issues that comes along with that is the whole issue of contract. Contracts can be very complex. Contracts can be very simple. We have a history at PennDOT with having public-private partnerships. We've used contractors for years and years and years because we don't have forces that really do that construction. We've had a long history of using design consultants and just getting into that world of financing and maintaining with our rapid bridge replacement program. But you can have a P3, a public-private partnership that does any or all of those kinds of features. Again, you can pretty much come up with any plan you want to accomplish any task as long as you can pay for it. And that's sort of the kicker and the reminder for all of us. I think from a county perspective, a regional perspective, you can really see this or be told about how public-private partnerships are really helpful for you, and they can be, and they are. You just need to balance that with the ultimate issue of how are you going to pay for it. There is always a component that brings that payment into it. So it can, I would say, for all these benefits, it can leverage private investment, it can access public sector innovation and skills, it can accelerate, it can shift key risks, but each of those cans brings a cost component. Again, if you want to have, again, I'll just illustrate our rapid bridge replacement program that we have at Pennsylvania, 558 bridges across the state. About 390 of those are built already. A balance of them hopefully will happen this calendar year. There's a 20-year maintenance component in that. So we're paying for those bridges to be maintained by someone else. Hey, that's good, right? Good if you can get it. Well, you get it because we said that's what we want, and we're paying for it. So you're not going to know if it was a good deal until the end of that maintenance piece is complete. What's the caliber of the bridges 20 years after they're built? So, you know, those kinds of things are good to know. It's part of the package, part of the approach that says, here's why we want to do what we want to do. Concern always is, are you getting that value for money? And that's part of what you really need to consider when you're trying to figure out why you want to do a public-private partnership. You want to get somebody to do something for you. Again, public always needs to bring the revenue, the cost, the funding to actually accomplish that. The private brings the workforce that you need to accomplish. So there's always a trade-off. One of the ideas that always comes out is that conversation about risk. And I'll give another illustration from our rapid bridge replacement program that's pretty key to that. PennDOT kept the risk of utilities, the utility coordination, the utility delays, because in order to give that to somebody else who still has the same level of risk that we do, you would have to pay a premium. So our approach was to try to keep the costs focused on the design and construction and the maintenance, and those risk areas that would be very, very expensive to just hand over and say anything with utility delay is yours. Your responsibility, we kept that. But that's a concern for us as we move forward. Every time there's a big storm somewhere and utility trucks are driving to another state, you know, we're all pulling our hair out because we know that somewhere down the road that impacts the ultimate cost of those projects. So that risk factor is probably the biggest concern that I would say of when you're thinking about a public-private partnership. Remember that risk factor. You really need to think through that. You certainly can push a lot of that to a contractor or a development entity, but they're going to make sure they guard their bottom line. So that's something key. So the best photo of the slideshow is in the things to ponder. This is not photoshopped. The reminder here is Billy Goat Gruff. There is always a troll under the bridge. Anybody from Pittsburgh knows that, right? There is always a toll associated with the bridge. So I think that's one of the things that I really want to emphasize on this slide too, is that cost. You need to remember that when a private entity brings financing to the table, they are not bringing funding to the table. And the difference between that is they may help you figure out how you can pay that back in a longer period of time, but you still ultimately need to pay that back. And you need to be able to plan for that and figure that out. Where we stand across the country, the lighter tan colored are those states who can have transportation, public-private partnerships. The darker states are those who have broader enabling legislation. For instance, college housing would be an example of the kinds of things that those other states can do through a P3. And then the uncolored do not have any enabling legislation. A couple things that we're hearing about that are happening around the country that certainly are piquing our interest and trying to get us engaged. Michigan is pursuing street lighting in a P3, certainly energy cost savings, things like that. We've seen a number of states, this is from Maryland, who's pursuing some stormwater pervious systems, pervious surfaces, approaches to trying to figure out, is there a different way, a different model? Purdue University actually included some street rebuilding and streetscapes, and I believe they have some housing all into one big P3. Across the state, we're doing a number of different things. I did touch on our Rapid Bridge Replacement Project, which is probably our most famous and most infamous story, at least, that we talk about across the board. Again, some pros and some cons. I'll just give one example early on of the real, I'll say, benefits concern, and this is on the concern area. When our district folks are out on a typical project talking about project schedules, when we tell a community that here's what the schedule is, here's what we're going to start, here's what we're going to complete the project, we're making that public commitment with our public trust, and we've learned over the years that that matters. When a private entity comes in and says, yeah, here's what we're planning on doing, and a little bit down the road they change their mind and say, oh, here's what we're going to do it instead because it works better. They're not as concerned with those schedule changes as a PennDOT person is. So unless it's in the contract that those are the kinds of things that matter, it doesn't. And I think that's one of the things you really need to be careful of in a contract, thinking through those. They are going to drive every decision that they make to the bottom line. And because that's why they're in business, to make that dollar. And it's something that needs to go into the thoughts very early in the process. A couple of the other things that we're really focusing on, talked about the Rapid Bridge Replacement Program. Certainly CNG fueling stations. I think we have about 10 of those completed so far out of the 29. Again, one of the challenges here is to make sure that we're getting the CNG buses timed very closely with the CNG fueling station. So again, that's a risk that's on PennDOT, but that project's going very smoothly. A couple of the other things that we have in the pipeline right now have to do with taking a look at Amtrak stations, trying to figure out how that works best. We have a safety patrol, and we just set out a request for information or interested parties with regards to wetland banking and had 16 firms submit. So there certainly is a lot of interest in whatever P3 is. One of the things that's sort of very interesting that always comes back The P3 steering committee still needs to authorize projects, but for instance, Northampton County, just so you know, my slide, the N is on the right line. But Northampton County, they have 33 bridges that they're funding through a county-wide public-private partnership. They've asked for no state or federal monies to support that. It's just a package that they've put together and said this public-private partnership is for us, and we can deal with those bridges on our own without asking for state or federal inputs. I think as we think about what the future is for P3s, there's a couple things that come to mind. And the first one I would say, hopefully the message is clear, you really need to think about how you're paying for it. That money component is the most critical aspect in my mind. One of the things that happened in Pennsylvania, why we were able to really take a bite at our bridge problem through a P3 was because we had enabling legislation in 2012, 2013, we had additional revenue. So what we could do is plan for some of that additional revenue, go into this project for that build time plus 20 years. So as you got an increase in funding, we had a financial plan to pay for those costs. Other than that, you're pretty much taking a bite out of the future needs, the future funding streams that you do have. So unless you're like a private business enabled increasing revenue, if you're tolling, things like that, that you can put a financial package together. But I think that's one of the areas that's really key. When you have that additional revenue, you can take care of that. I would echo the concerns with the Highway Trust Fund. I think anytime I get a chance to talk to anybody about transportation funding, we have a cliff in 2022 that maybe sooner, that pretty much the only way that the Highway Trust Fund has been stabilized is because of other monies coming into it. I know our friends at AASHTO estimate that in order for the Highway Trust Fund to stay flat, so the monies that we spend now to stay flat, you would need a gas tax equivalent of about 12 cents a gallon at the federal level. So there's a huge, huge gap in the financial planning long term. I think for us at PennDOT, we're going to sit back and until we understand what federal funds we can anticipate, you're not going to see a very large P3 again until we have a funding revenue stream to take care of that. Did touch on the ITQ already. I think we're going to be pursuing those little bite-sized pieces of things that we can kind of do and innovate. I think the street lighting is certainly one. We're certainly talking about truck parking. How is there a better way of addressing truck parking? But those are more modest approaches to P3. Other thing we're doing is getting out with our district offices and our planning partners across the state and having a conversation about, as we look at the 12-year program, what kind of P3 opportunities do we have? For instance, in our Lackawanna, Luzerne MPO area, northeastern part of the state, we have an interstate that's costing about $400 million if you lump all the pieces together that we're working on. One of the things that we want to do is take a look at that and say, does that really make sense to do it as we typically do in a couple construction sections? Or do we want to step back and say, maybe that's a logical piece for a P3? Again, some of the benefits there, the benefit being, oh, I can design it all into one contract. I can design it potentially for a specific contractor. And there's benefits in doing that to lessen some of the design costs that we would have. The other piece of that would be, how do we want to fund the construction? Do we want it all done sooner? Well, in my world, I say, I've got so many interstates that are in bad shape, I don't want to do any of them before their life is cut short. I don't want to cut their life short because I need some of that money to cover another drastically needed interstate improvement. So those are the kind of trade-offs that we really need to consider. So again, thanks for an opportunity to talk about P3 and look forward to any questions you guys may have.